These three true stories will have you wondering what is real and what is fiction. All three stories are first-hand accounts from people living otherwise normal, everyday lives. The last story tonight is especially strange. While researching it, it is possible that this thing has found me, and I hope it doesn't spread to you too. This is the story of Patrick. He was 13 when he went with his mother and sister to visit his grandmother. His grandmother lived in a secluded area up in the mountains of Taylorsville, Kentucky, a place where houses were scattered across the hills, each one isolated, far from each other and even farther from town. The drive there took just over an hour, and as always, Patrick was excited to arrive and see his family. After they settled in exchanged greetings, Patrick's uncle Tony, who was known for his adventurous spirit, suggested they go out raccoon and squirrel hunting. Tony had always been the cool uncle in Patrick's eyes, with his collection of firearms, ATVs, and a fondness for taking Patrick and his cousins out on adventures around the woods. Eager to experience something new, Patrick agreed. Tony selected 2 shotguns, one for himself and a lighter one for Patrick, suitable for his first time handling such a weapon. Together they set off into the woods. The forest was dense and quiet. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a shadow that seemed to dance with each step they took. As they wandered deeper, they saw no sign of any animals. Growing impatient, Patrick decided to fire a shot into the trees, just to feel the thrill of pulling the trigger. It was immature, sure, but his uncle humored his youthful spirit. After a while, they had ventured quite far into the woods. Then, they stumbled into a small, overgrown cemetery. This may sound strange to most, but out in the deep country, it's not all that uncommon. In the 1800s, families would have their own private cemeteries somewhere on their property, and generations would be buried there. Weathered gravestones still standing, some slanted, others mostly buried in brush and overgrowth. One stone stood out in particular. It was partially broken and looked as though it had been forgotten by time. However, something about it attracted Patrick. They both moved toward it, and together they examined the faded writing. The words etched into the stone contained strange phrases. They seemed biblical, but somehow dark, unsettling in such an isolated place. Just as they finished reading, a sudden and eerie silence fell over the forest. Then, out of nowhere, the leaves around them began to stir, swirling violently as though caught in a fierce, invisible wind. The noise was loud and chaotic, the rustling of leaves filling the air in frantic energy. Patrick felt a chill run down his spine, a sinking feeling in his stomach as panic gripped him. He glanced at Tony, hoping for comfort, but he seemed equally disturbed. His usually calm uncle, perhaps in an attempt to ward off whatever was causing this commotion, began firing a shotgun into the trees around them. The leaves continued to move unnaturally, almost seeming to pick up intensity as a response to the violent disruption. It was as if some dark force was making its presence known, warning them, encouraging their prompt departure. Finally, realizing they should leave, Tony grabbed Patrick by his shirt and said, "We have to go now." They turned and quickly made their way back, keeping their shotguns ready, walking with a tense urgency, as though they were being followed. When they reached the safety of the house, Patrick was shaken to his core. His uncle, Tony, seemed oddly unfazed, despite moments ago seeming to be in a panic. Patrick did try and talk to him about it, but his uncle didn't even acknowledge him. It almost seemed like he didn't know what he was talking about. To this day, Patrick recalls that chilling encounter with a sense of unease, an unease made greater as he says he can remember every moment of that day like it was happening now, but he cannot remember a word that was written on that stone. He can see the stone, but in his mind, the face of it is completely blank, just flat rock face. This is Tim's story. When he was about 5 or 6, he used to talk to a ghost. He'd never actually seen the ghost, only heard his voice at night, echoing softly through his room. Tim was certain the ghost was a man, or he once was a man, but he didn't know his name, and the ghost never called him by his. In his youthful innocence, Tim wasn't terrified, just curious. One night, he asked the first question that popped into his head: "Are you a good ghost or a bad ghost?" He laughs now, realizing how funny the question was. He could have asked so much more: who the ghost was, why he was there, or how he had become a ghost at all. But all he cared about then was if the ghost was good or bad. The ghost paused, then answered. But to young Tim, he never seemed bad at all. He was just there, kind of distant, kind of sad. They didn't talk about anything in particular, but he found comfort in the ghost's voice. It became part of his nightly routine. Then, one night, the ghost was simply not there. As Tim got older, he moved on, leaving the memory of those strange conversations in the past. Life returned to normal, and eventually he forgot the ghost entirely. Then, 2 years ago, he was sitting in the basement with his dad and brother, enjoying an episode of their favorite cartoon, when the door to the laundry room creaked open by itself. It was sudden, strange, and oddly familiar. Tim's heart skipped a beat. He had recently watched a video about squatters, so he brushed it off as his mind playing tricks. But the thought lingered there. He asked his dad to check the laundry room and crawl space, just to be safe. But no one was there, and there was no sign anyone had ever been. A week later, Tim was in school, working in a small room just down the hall from his classroom. His teacher let him and 2 friends use this quiet space. Tim had some sensory issues, and his teacher was empathetic toward his condition. The room had a sink on one side. Tim and his friends were working on the opposite side when, without warning, the faucet turned on by itself. The water gushed out for a few seconds, then shut off, leaving Tim and his friends in silence. It reminded him of the ghost's presence from years before, and for the first time he wondered if maybe it hadn't truly left. The odd occurrences continued, subtle usually, as if the ghost was testing his ability to reach out. His door would creak open on its own in the middle of the night, catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of his eye, shadows that seemed to stretch and bend, and each time, Tim was filled with that same familiar feeling he'd had as a child. One night, after a series of these strange events, Tim woke up to a soft whisper. He froze, recognizing the voice. It was the ghost from his childhood. "Tim," the voice whispered. It was the first time the ghost had ever spoken his name. "I need your help." Terrified, but unable to ignore it, Tim managed to speak. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice shaky. The ghost's voice was somber, almost pleading. "I don't belong here," it said. "I need to find my way home." Heart racing, Tim didn't know what to say. He didn't understand what the ghost wanted from it, but he felt a strange sense of duty, as if he were the ghost's last connection to the world. Over the next few weeks, the ghost would return, each time repeating his request. Tim began to feel the weight of the ghost's sadness, the loneliness of someone trapped between worlds. It haunted him during the day, lingering in his thoughts, pulling him back into a mystery he didn't know how to solve. Then, one night, the ghost stopped coming. It was quiet again, eerily quiet. The strange occurrences ceased and the house felt different, almost lighter, like something had been lifted. It was as if the ghost had finally moved on. Tim felt a strange sense of peace, like he had somehow helped without ever fully understanding how. Years later, Tim still thinks about it, that ghost, from time to time. He wonders where he went and whether he ever found where he did belong. But above all, he remembers the quiet, haunting conversations they shared, a connection he will never fully be able to explain. This next story involves a young boy, his family, and an old house. Parker is now an adult and has recently started digging into this occurrence again. I also grew up in an old house, and while talking to Parker about this story, I started really getting the creeps as I remember strange things that happened in my own house. Funny enough, after chatting back and forth into the night about the story, I went to bed. A few minutes after laying down, my own door slowly creaked open. It made me very uncomfortable, to say the least. I hope this thing hasn't followed me somehow. Parker always felt uneasy about the closet in his room. It was a kind of creepy feeling that he brushed off as kid stuff. Something he managed with the usual defenses, keeping a nightlight on or hiding under the blankets. As he got older, the fear faded into the background, becoming more of a vague discomfort he rarely acknowledged. One night, things took a turn. Parker had just come back from watching The Boogeyman, a horror movie that didn't win him over with its cheesy scares, but it left him feeling a little on edge all the same. A familiar feeling I think we've all had, the kind of fear you feel silly for even having. Laying in his bed, he flipped around, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling and fall asleep. He told himself it was ridiculous to get freaked out over a movie like that, but just as he started to settle down, he heard a loud thump. He bolted up in bed and looked toward the sound. The closet door handle had completely fallen off. The closet door, still closed, or was now closed. Was it closed before? Every instinct told him not to investigate further. So he fell backwards in bed and pulled the blankets over his head. his light stayed on that night. See, that door was not just a closet as you and I may think of it. Closet was what Parker and his family called it. It was more of a passageway or a tunnel between Parker's room and a storage area in the basement. Personally, looking at the pictures, I don't know how Parker ever could fall asleep in there, but I suppose we all get used to our surroundings over time. Over the years, Parker tried to forget about the incident, chalking it up to a random, harmless event. However, life has a funny way of revisiting you with old mysteries. Parker eventually became a joiner, another name for a door builder, and with his new knowledge, he remembered that night and decided to check out the closet door again. What he found didn't add up. The screws holding the handle were tight, no signs of rust, and the structure was solid. He couldn't find a single reason why the handle would have fallen off like that. No one could explain how it happened. Everything about the door was sound, solid, and intact. Yet somehow, the handle had come off as though something had pushed it from the other side. As someone with years of experience building doors, Parker has no explanation for that night. To this day, he finds himself wondering if it really was just a random event, or if something else, something beyond conventional logic, was at play. Even stranger, when he mentioned it to his coworkers, their curiosity piqued and they took a look themselves. They too had no explanation. That's when he brought it up to his family. It turns out, after he left, the strange occurrences didn't end. When he left, his sister moved into the room and she told him she always had a strange feeling while in there. Later in life, her son tried to move into the same bedroom, but he claimed he saw a ghost and then refused to ever enter again. Multiple people, while visiting, have commented that they too get an odd feeling, a vibe from that room that is unsettling, unnatural, and they are compelled to leave as fast as possible. That once foolish childhood fear he had of that closet started to feel less childish. The fact that the house was built in the early 1900s just added to the mystery. What happened in that house? What was left behind? Unseen but still felt. Will whatever it is ever gain the ability to show itself? Who will be there when it does? We know it's not going to be Parker or his sister. They've moved on and only taken some pictures and the haunting memories with them. Unless it follows them. Make sure you check out this video next, and don't forget to subscribe to be the first to catch new episodes released every week. As always, thank you for joining me for another Midnight Brew.